While the Japanese Zero has been praised for its maneuverability, speed, and range, its initial American adversary, the F4F Wildcat, was built with other priorities in mind. The Wildcat was bulky and heavily armed, while the Zero was sleek and light. Many have put forth the idea that America needed an upgrade from the Wildcat in order to stay competitive with the Japanese aviators. But how much truth is there to this idea? Was the Wildcat really outclassed by the Zero? Or did the Wildcat just have a different design philosophy that has gone unappreciated by many critics? And if the Wildcat was up to the task of competing with the Zero, why did the Wildcat get replaced so quickly with the Hellcat?
Meet the Hellcat.
No one can deny that the Zero was faster than the Wildcat. The Wildcat had a top speed of 318 miles per hour, or 512 kilometers per hour. Meanwhile, the Zero had a top speed of 331 miles per hour, or 533 kilometers per hour. As one can observe, this speed difference is certainly not drastic. It was not actually the top speed of the Zero that gave it an advantage, but rather the minimum speed. The Zero had a significantly lower stalling speed than the Wildcat. A lower stalling speed meant the Zero could perform tighter maneuvers and easily shake off pursuing Wildcats.
The F4F Wildcat. It compared favorably with the Zero in firepower, but was no match for it in speed or maneuverability.
One might think this is reason enough for the Wildcat to be considered at a disadvantage against the Zero. But the Wildcat was able to make up for the shortcoming in other ways. Japanese ace pilot Saburo Sakai was recorded as saying, "Even after I had poured 500 or 600 rounds of ammunition directly into the Grumman, the airplane did not fall but kept on flying. I thought this very odd." To my surprise, the Grumman's rudder and tail were torn to shreds, looking like an old torn piece of rag. The Zero, which had taken that many bullets, would have been a ball of fire by now. The Wildcat being able to take much more punishment than the Zero does give pause to the idea that the Zero outclassed the Wildcat. But in addition to the ruggedness of the Wildcat, American pilots were also able to use some innovative tactics to counter the Zero. The famous Thatch Weave was used by many aviators to scare off trailing Zeros. Developed by John S. Thatch in the early days of the war, the Thatch Weave was a method developed that required two pilots to perform some skillful maneuvers. The Zero is nearly impossible to shake once it got in position behind a Wildcat. The Thatch Weave exploited this by using one Wildcat as bait. Once a Zero got in position behind one of the Wildcats, the two Wildcats would turn toward each other and cross paths. Once significant distance was again created between the American planes, their pilots would again turn toward each other, this time bringing the Japanese Zero directly into the sights of the second plane. This maneuver was used frequently in the Pacific by groups of either 2 or 4 American fighter pilots. When this tactic was still in development, it was recorded as working 100% of the time by test pilots.
Gee, thanks, Commander. Thanks very much, sir. Shall we say, good luck? No, sir. We'll make our own luck. Well.
The Thatch Weave was first implemented at the decisive Battle of Midway in June 1942 by John Thatch, who successfully used it to fight off an attacking Zero squadron. John Thatch's Wildcat squadron sustained no damage. In response, the Japanese eventually figured out countermaneuvers to the Thatch Weave. Many Japanese pilots would simply disengage from the dogfight when being pulled into the trap. Veteran Japanese pilots even figured out ways to shoot down the secondary Wildcat during the maneuver.
Don't try to dogfight unless you are sure you can outmaneuver the enemy.
Still, the Thatch Weave does a perfect job of demonstrating how the American pilots of the Pacific were able to adapt and turn the Wildcat into a feared aircraft.
Many outstanding fighter pilot achievements may seem almost unbelievable, but once you have learned how they accomplished these victories and the system they used, you'll realize it's just a trick of the trade, carried out by fighting men with the ability and know-how that it takes to win aerial battles.
So the Wildcat did have some disadvantages compared to the Zero. The Wildcat was a bit slower and couldn't perform maneuvers as tightly and gracefully as the Zero. However, the Wildcat was also more heavily armed and armored. Additionally, the Wildcat pilots were able to employ certain tactics that caused the Wildcat pilots to be a worthy adversary to the Zeros. Let's look at some numbers. During the Battle of the Coral Sea in May of 1942, the Japanese lost 14 Zeros while the Americans lost 10 Wildcats. Throughout the rest of the year, 115 Zeros would be shot down, while 101 Wildcats were lost. During 1943, as American pilots became more skilled and the Japanese continued to lose more experienced Zero pilots, the Wildcat would earn a staggering kill ratio of 6.9 to 1. Despite the respectable performance of the Wildcat during World War II, the Grumman F6F Hellcat was introduced during the second half of the war. The Hellcat retained some visual similarities to the Wildcat, but was in fact an entirely new plane built from the ground up. The idea was that if Americans could win dogfights with the Wildcat, imagine how much success the Americans could have if they were equipped with a plane that was better in almost every way. Leroy Grumman himself worked closely with the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics to develop a plane that could dominate the skies and save lives in the Bloody Pacific Campaign. The designers at Grumman were instructed to mount the cockpit higher and to give the fuselage a downward slope in order to give the pilot maximum visibility. It is arguable that the biggest upgrade given to the Hellcat was a more powerful 18-cylinder engine that put out a thunderous 2,000 horsepower, an enormous jump from the 1,200 horsepower engine used in the Wildcat. For defense, the Hellcat was given a bullet-resistant windshield and over 200 pounds of cockpit armor. Hellcat night fighter variants were also produced, equipped with extra radar equipment to help pilots navigate the treacherous night skies. Some experimental prototype Hellcats were even equipped with turbochargers for extra power, but these proved to be unreliable while only providing marginal power increases. Once the design of the Hellcat was finalized, Grumman was able to crank out over 12,000 units in just over 2 years. In November of 1943, the Hellcat would see battle for the first time, in a fight for air superiority over Karawa. American Hellcats would prove themselves by shooting down 30 Japanese Zeros, while only suffering one lost Hellcat. The Hellcat could outroll and outrun the Zero with ease, even though the Zero was still more nimble at slower speeds. The Hellcat capitalized on the already existing strategies of American aviators. With a more powerful engine, if an American found themselves in a dogfight with a Zero, the Hellcat pilot would simply speed up, disengage the Japanese, and then re-engage at a more favorable angle or with reinforcements.
If your fundamentals are right and your section works as a team, it doesn't matter what the enemy tries, you've got him.
All the agility and trick maneuvers in the world were ineffective if your opponent could simply fly away from you and come back when you least expected it. The Hellcat would establish itself as a terror of the sky during the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, where so many Japanese aircraft were shot down that the Americans nicknamed the battle the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Hellcat would go on to account for 75% of all aerial victories of the U.S. in the Pacific. By the end of the war, the Hellcat had earned a staggering kill ratio of 13-1 against the Zero, more than doubling that of the Wildcat. Medal of Honor recipient David McCampbell scored all 34 of his aerial victories in the Grumman Hellcat. We will dive more into the performance specs of the Hellcat in a later video, but I think this information allows us to answer the question: did the Americans need to upgrade the Wildcat and replace it with the Hellcat? The Wildcat was able to hold its own against the Japanese Zeros. Much of the criticism levied toward the Wildcat ignores the fact that it had a kill ratio of almost 7-1 once Americans figured out how to counter the Japanese fighters. But with a kill ratio more than twice that, the Hellcat proved to be worth the upgrade. While it is very likely that America would still have had a successful campaign with the Wildcat, the goal of any military is to achieve victory while still protecting your own countrymen. For this reason, yes, the Wildcat did need to be upgraded. America had the industrial and logistical capabilities to make a plane that was simply better and kept its pilots safer. The Hellcat was able to do exactly that and established itself as one of the greatest fighter aircrafts of its time. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you found anything inaccurate, please don't hesitate to let us know in the comments. If you'd like to see more of these kinds of videos, then please consider subscribing.